Welcome everybody to the AAF May program. I'm Carrie Cousins. I'm the president of AAF Roanoke. Thank you all for signing in for the program today. This seems to be the week of vacations and lack of email. I don't know if you guys have noticed it this week, but it's definitely been a little bit slower here in our office. And you know what we're starting to see, we talked about a little bit here before we started, is this: we're starting to see a shift with more people in their offices when we join these calls. And hopefully later this summer, we can all get together for something in person and do a little bit of that old-fashioned networking that we've kind of forgotten about. So if you have any ideas about how to kind of ease back into that, or want to help facilitate it, or know a venue that would just be amazing, I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to reach out to me personally through social or email or whatever, or you can email me at info@aafroanoke.org. I think it'd be a fun conversation to jumpstart this summer to kind of get some more in-person program going. On those same lines, I'd like to invite anyone here or anyone you know who's in the advertising and marketing space to get more involved with AAF in the coming year. Our calendar year ends on June 30th, and that's when we really start to look at the coming year. Who wants to be on committees? Who wants to help with programming? Who wants to join the board? There are plenty of active roles for everyone. There's no experience required, and there's varying levels of time commitments. So you don't have to join the board and feel like you're going to spend 20 hours a week volunteering. There's something from someone who wants to just give a little bit here and there to people who want much more of a commitment. I'm happy to tell you about it. Reach out to me. We can have coffee. I can sell it to you. And I can also give you, the reality of what some of those jobs look like. A lot of it really kind of is based on what you put in is what you get out. And there's a wealth of opportunity within AAF to really kind of network in the greater community here in Roanoke and outside throughout the region and nationally. So it's a good opportunity. Even if you want to get a little more involved, I'd love to chat with you. Excuse me. Keep an eye on the chat window as well today as we go through the program. We are going to be giving away a few copies of Greg's books. So that's where we will collect your information. I'm going to randomly just kind of assign names here and there for you to claim those. And we will have plenty of time at the end of this session for questions. So Greg can answer your questions. We can have a lot of conversation about this topic because I think it is super, super relevant right now as we are all trying to figure out how agile we are and how to pivot in the workplace or change workplaces or be a part of a new workplace. This is more relevant than ever. Creative agility is really what is going to get us from where we are today to where we're going to be in 6 months to where we're going to be in a year. So this is a great time to kind of jumpstart that topic. So Greg Kihlström, did I butcher that?
No, you got it.
Is a best-selling author, speaker, and entrepreneur. He has he's been selling award-winning digital experiences through an agency and has worked with some of the top brands in the world, including Coca-Cola, Dell, FedEx, GEICO, Marriott, MTV, Starbucks, Toyota, and VMware. He's written 7 books, including The Center of Experience, which came out in 2020, and talks about how customer and employee experience can be operationalized into a cohesive brand experience. And I am sure everybody on this call today understands the importance of brand experience. His podcast, The Agile World, launched in 2019 and is now in season 3. The topics that you might hear on this podcast include everything from brand strategy to marketing, the customer and employee experience with thought leaders from leading organizations around the world. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and let Greg do all the talking. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carrie. Really appreciate the introduction and looking forward to talking today. So I'm going to share my screen here. If this works the first time, then all right. I think we're good. Yeah, no, looking forward to talking today. And as Carrie was saying, I think there's a lot of things that are relevant to this discussion, which are, we've been making a big change in the way that we work. That happened about a year ago, and now it's happening again as companies are figuring out what the return to the office, if they're returning to the office, how much, and how often, and things like that. With all of that, we all had to maintain our level of output and productivity and our creativity. And so, everyone in our industry, as well as many others, have had to figure out, how do we maintain things, even, how do we maintain great work, even though the world around us is fast changing. Even without what's happened with the pandemic, and now with the return to the office and post-pandemic planning, there have always been challenges in, I owned a marketing agency for a while. I'll get into more detail about this in a minute, but there's kind of the creative camps, and there's the, let's call it project management and account management camps, and more operational, financial, and things like that. And there's been historically kind of this conflict, and sometimes it's healthy conflict, and sometimes it's less constructive. And so what I wanted to do with giving this talk is to talk about how we can actually marry those two, and by doing so in a constructive way, just get better results, and have a win-win for everybody, for those people that fall in that quote unquote creative camp, as well as those that are focused on budgets and timing and everything like that. So I'll be sharing some thoughts from my books, as was mentioned, and I'll looking forward to hearing some of your questions at the end as well. So a little bit about me. I won't go into too much detail because of the introduction, but as I mentioned, I started, ran, and sold a marketing agency. So I started my company Carousel 30 in 2003, sold it in 2017. So I ran it for about 14 years. And as you can imagine, over that time, saw a lot of things come and go, and some stay and continue to evolve. So everything from the advent of social media marketing, because in 2003 there really wasn't social media, so kind of saw the rise of that, saw the rise of personalization, automation, big data, all of those types of things as well, and was fortunate enough to be able to work with some amazing brands on digital experiences, so everything from digital marketing to website projects. And then after selling my agency, I've moved more into the customer experience and employee experience realm. And the way I think they're deeply tied to marketing, just because marketing is so fundamental and so important in talking about products and services that people should be aware of. But customer and employee experience are so tied to, how do we make those products as good as possible in the first place so that they can be marketed, and how do we train and develop and retain employees that deliver those products and services, so that when we as marketers are tasked with creating a marketing campaign, we don't just have a bunch of one-time customers because they buy it and then they hate the product, or they try the service and it just wasn't a good experience. And so I see all of those things as very tightly tied with one another. So in addition, I do consulting on a number of different things, CX, EX, and digital transformation, as well as some digital experience and marketing strategy. Host the podcast as mentioned, and just one more plug for AAF in general. I will say, so I'm based here just outside the Washington, D.C. And so I served as president of AAF DC for a couple of years, was on the board for about a decade or so, served on the district and the national boards as well in my times. And I just can't say enough good things about having a great network of people that you can rely on, having a regular time to meet, and even if it's not always work related, just have a group of people that's that kind of understands your pain, and that you can collaborate with and even just commiserate with sometimes. And so I think groups like AAF are so valuable to us, even in a virtual world. Ideally, we're going to have more in-person meetings, getting back to that. But even so, just can't say enough good things about that. So I'll kind of get started with the talk here, but I think some important things. In addition to my background here, I swear this whole presentation is not just going to be about me, but I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about agility. And so in addition to my experience, I also consider myself an agile person. And so I have a podcast called the Agile World. I wrote some books with Agile in the title. I see obviously a trend here in myself, but I don't think I'm alone. And so what I mean by this is a few things. First of all, this has frustrated people that I've worked with throughout my career, but I strongly believe that it is important to show people things at some point in their progress, and not simply like get a deliverable done, completed where I think it's completed, and then show everybody what I think is a finished product. I don't think that's a good way of working, particularly when you're collaborating with a team. So I like to show people things that are, as my thoughts are collected and things like that, but it's enough so someone can kind of understand, but it's not so much where they can't meaningfully weigh in and give feedback and potentially steer the direction of it. And this could be anything. This could be a piece of writing, this could be a design, this could be a strategy, and anything. I think that we get better results when we show people our work and we allow people to get involved in the process. It doesn't mean they have to own the process. It doesn't mean it's their deliverable to finish, but it does mean we kind of let them into our thought process. And it does a number of things, and I'll get into this quite a bit more. I believe in having very clear goals, and so setting measurable, meaningfully measurable goals. But a lot of times, as we've all seen in the last year, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen a few weeks, sometimes even a few days, let alone months and years out. And so set clear goals, but be flexible about how you get there. The path to getting there is going to change, whether it's a global pandemic, which hopefully that doesn't happen for a very, very long time in the world, but it could be disruption in your industry, it could be competition, it could be any number of things. You need to be able to be flexible about how you achieve those. And as long as you know where you're going, you can be able to adapt to those goals. And finally, just constantly striving for perfection. And I don't think that perfection is something that is you achieve it and that it's set in stone. I think the perfection is something can be perfect at a point in time. But as we see, I mean, look at anything from music from 10 years ago, movie Oscar winners from 15 years ago, whatever you want to look at. Those things, probably they're still good, but some of them haven't aged that well. They're not perfect. And so we need to think of perfection as a moving target, not necessarily as something that we achieve once and then we're done. So when you think of that, yes, it's a little bit more work because it means we can't just simply say, hey, we did it, we're good, let's move on. But it's more realistic. And whether you're in-house at a company or whether you're working at an agency for several clients, the stakeholders that you work for are going to appreciate that fact that you don't just look at things as being done. You look at them as in a constant state of needing upkeep and iteration and optimization. So in talking about agile creativity, I am known for having semantic discussions at length sometimes, but I won't get into excruciating detail. But I do think it's really important that we define what we mean by creativity. I think those copywriters and designers and creative directors, those in the quote unquote creative fields, it's somewhat easier sometimes to talk about creativity, but I don't think that that those roles and those disciplines are own creativity solely. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of creativity that is able to be had in many, many professions. I will say, maybe with the caveat of creative accounting is not necessarily something that is sought after, but outside of that, a business person an entrepreneur can be incredibly creative in how they solve problems. A lawyer can be creative in how they, approach a case. It's not just those, traditional creative realms. So therefore, account managers, project managers, people that you don't necessarily think of in those creative fields, there's so much room to be able to solve challenges, come up with new ideas, and innovate no matter where you are. And so, when I talk about creativity, I mean this in a broader sense of the term. Even though, I know we're here as an advertising and marketing crowd, so there's probably some, definitely some let's call it capital C creatives in the crowd here today. So when we talk about the challenge there, and I talked about it a little bit at the very beginning, but I'll give an example here of the need for process in order to enable better creativity. So back in college, I played music. I was in a band and stuff like that. And so, we would gather in person and play and record and stuff like that. When I moved on, I moved away from where I went to college. And so we would do things remotely. So even, pre-COVID, this is many, many years pre-COVID, but we would kind of swap files, and everybody had their own little recording studio in their house. And I had everything like set up. I was busy working, or at points had a day job, or was freelancing or something like that. But, so I was busy during the day, but I'd have everything like kind of ready to go. And, so I'd be able to record something and then pass it along. As the years go by, I got busier. I spent less and less time doing that. Had less and less time. Life kind of gets in the way sometimes. I tried picking it up a few years ago, and I was feeling like the creative mood was striking, so to speak. And so what ended up happening was I spent about like 2 or 3 hours trying to set stuff up. And by the time I got ready to try to do something, I was so frustrated and I was so burned out. Like that creative spark was gone because I spent all my time on the process. I had to rethink, okay, well, where do I plug this? How do I do this? Levels, so and so. Those that know recording and music can empathize, I'm sure. But I spent all the time getting the process ready, kind of reinventing. And then by the time I was ready to go, I was like, wow, I spent all my mental energy on process. It's time to move on. I got to get back to work or go to sleep or something like that. And so we spend a lot of time in our work reinventing things, and this is a problem. So why should we have to reinvent something that's worked well? When you can document things, when you have project management tools or people tasked with doing that and processes that work, it makes the creative process so much more effective. And creatives, the capital C, quote unquote creatives, often they want to do things in different ways and think that sometimes, and I've served as a designer and a creative director myself, and often I've thought this way, that you kind of want to, you feel like process kind of is cumbersome and gets in the way, but when you think of it, it actually just allows you to get to the next step and get one step further. The other thing the process allows us to do is to stay on track. A lot of times, you get in a brainstorming session and you kind of fall in love with a creative idea, whether that's for a marketing campaign or just a design or a tagline or something like that. You kind of just fall in love with your idea, whether it's yours or your team's, and you get kind of on this tangent and all of a sudden find yourself at the end of, let's call it at the end of a sprint or a phase or a deliverable, and having to remind yourself, well, we love this idea, but does it actually align back to the original goals and purpose? And sure enough, most of the time it probably does, but to have a process in place that continually reminds you of, this is what we're hoping to achieve. Yes, we can be as creative as we possibly can, but it's got to align with these goals. Creativity can flourish within constraints. It's not a matter of choosing one for the other. It's It's a matter of using those constraints of goals and measurements in order to help move the creative process in the right direction. Just like reinventing the wheel, starting processes from scratch. So, sometimes you'll be like, okay, this is the last time we're going to reinvent the wheel. Let's document things. And then sure enough, somebody else in your company is starting something new and they don't know what you know, and they didn't talk to the other person in this other department, so on and so forth. And so you're starting projects from scratch, you're starting processes from scratch, and just wasting a lot of time. That all of that time recreating, reinventing, starting from scratch can be used towards creativity, towards really aligning towards those goals. And finally, it's just inefficient to invent things over and over again. It's inefficient to get let's say halfway or 3/4 of the way to your end goal and realize that you're off on your trajectory, and that's demoralizing. Think of your teams. If you manage a team, if you own a company, if you're part of a team, it's demoralizing to feel like, wow, we keep doing all this work and it's redundant, and it's not really, all of that process stuff is kind of like it should be there, but I feel like I spend X amount of my job just reinventing things as opposed to doing what I was hired to do. That's what someone might say in a situation like that. And there's a reason why there's a lot of burnout on on creative teams, whether they're in-house or at agencies, is just everything moves so quickly and everybody feels like there's not enough time to document things and do all this. But what ends up happening is you waste so much time on the stuff that isn't actually central to the deliverable that, again, you're burning your team out, and in some cases burning yourself out. So how does process help with this? One example that I like to use is ballroom dancing. So I'm not you don't want to see me try to ballroom dance, but I do know a bit about it. I actually made a documentary about ballroom dancing almost 2 decades ago, spent some time following some people and learned a bit about the process. And so, one of the interesting things I found out about that is you think of dancing as a very creative process. Like there's a lot of room for interpretation and following different set pieces of music. But when you think about, and those of you that know a little bit more about this, the waltz is a very different process and series of steps than the tango. One uses 3/4 time, one uses 4/4 time. And, different pieces of music use different places that you put your feet at different points in the music, and in a bar of music even. So there is this tremendous ability to interpret and be creative, and yet everyone knows where their foot's supposed to go next. And so I think this is a great metaphor for us as creative and marketing agencies. Is it doesn't mean that you can't be wildly creative and interpret things in a very unique and meaningful way, but process helps you know where your foot's supposed to go next. And so you don't have to think about that piece. You don't have to think about what dance you're performing or what kind of project you're doing or what kind of timeline you're on. You can focus all of that mental and creative energy on how you interpret the challenge. Focusing your creativity. So, Steve Jobs was famous for lots of things, but he was famous for wearing the same thing every day, basically. He didn't put any mental process in, what he chose to wear. And you could see, over decades, basically same outfit. I've heard Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook does the same thing. It's just sort of like, it's one less thing to worry about. And so by using process and being able to rely on a consistent process, again, it allows you to just not worry about all those other things. You've kind of solved those problems. You've solved what goes where. Your mental energy is focused on creative challenges. I also believe that in the concept of healthy tension, and I do think that there can be a healthy tension between the creative process and the need to get deliverables on time, on budget, and in the manner that a client needs them. Again, whether you're in-house or agency, there's always a client. I believe that creative and marketing endeavors done within constraints, and it forces, some people say they work well with a deadline or things like that. That's a way of saying, I need some tension, I need a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of stress in order to get things done, because it helps me. That constraint of a deadline gives me the momentum and just the kind of push that I need. I don't believe that procrastination is the most healthy way of doing that. I think good process and iterative ways of working are a lot more healthy than procrastination, but that is a shortcut that a lot of people use in order to kind of jumpstart that tension and that process. And so, learn to embrace that. Don't, it doesn't mean you're enemies within an organization, the creatives and the project management, or however things are split up, but it does mean that you both bring something really valuable to the table. It is someone's job to make sure that you're on time and budget and that the requirements are met. And so, embrace those constraints, because they're going to help you. They're going to be a reason why you make some of the design decisions or the creative decisions that you make. And using process helps you really meaningfully learn from your mistakes. There's certainly, we remember anecdotally, okay, well, this might have gone wrong, or I could have done this better, but having a process of documenting, understanding, reviewing things at regular intervals, this allows us to have a process by which we can take those, it's not always mistakes, sometimes it's just things to do slightly better or optimize, but we can take all of those things, we can do it in a healthy and constructive manner, take that in, and then do it better next time. If there's a problem or an opportunity for improvement in your process, you will be able to say, okay, at this stage, we really need to do X, Y, and Z because the clients keep having all these questions and we keep going over time and budget at this point in the process. Okay, let's do something about that. Let's measure, let's learn, let's pay particular attention to that point in a project, and then let's change it next time. If you invent your processes, or if everything's kind of ad hoc every time, you can't really do that. You can anecdotally, again, rely on a few things and maybe do things differently. But if you have a more rigid process, you can actually make meaningful changes. So, let's talk about a few things then not to do. So I've talked quite a bit about what to do. So by the same token of it's important to have a process. Don't hide behind the process. I think at the end of the day, we are humans, where the machines have not taken over. They aren't going to take over anytime soon. We've got to work together as teammates. So, this goes for as much for creatives and those people in sort of that camp, as well as the project management. Don't hide behind a process and say, well, that this is the way that it has to get done and there's no room to move. There's always room to understand and iterate and optimize something. Maybe in a certain case, you don't have the time, you don't have the budget to do anything, but work together to figure out what you can do. Chances are there is a way to make some meaningful changes, or at least, like I was saying just earlier, at least learn from your mistakes, instead of just saying, hey, well, that's the way it is, and good luck, basically. Don't lose sight of the end goal. I mean, like I was saying earlier, don't make sure that you're keeping that in mind always. And, regardless of where you are, you can't throw out those measurable goals simply because you're focused on the next step and the next step ahead in a process. So, you've got to embrace the idea of using and documenting and following your processes better, but don't let them, don't lose sight of the forest for the trees, so to speak. So designing a process that enhances creativity. Here's a few ideas that I have. So I think it goes without saying, but collaboration is key. You can't do this in in a corner here. It takes collaboration. It takes the process working for everybody. It can't just work for the CFO. You can't just make your company a bunch of money. It's got to work for the designers, the copywriters, the marketing folks, the account manager. It's got to work for everybody at an agency or an in-house agency. It's got to work for everybody at a client. And so therefore, everyone needs to be involved in some way of creating the process. And so it doesn't mean that anybody can raise their hand and change things on a whim, but it does mean that you need to get feedback because everybody's got to contribute to it. Everyone should have the ability to give feedback and iterate. And, maybe if you're halfway through a project, you can't change anything, but next time get that feedback, make it better. And also, beware of the lone wolves, so to speak, of people that just kind of go off and do something. And like I was saying earlier about iterating and showing your work, don't you can't let someone just kind of go off and do something and take themselves out of the process and then insert themselves back in when they see fit. Everybody's got to be part of it throughout. There are going to be times where you divide, like a designer doesn't need design by committee and a writer doesn't need writing by committee. Like it's not about that, but it is about, a strategist has something meaningful to say about design or writing. It doesn't make them a writer. It just means they need to be able to contribute at a set point in time. Be aware and embrace mistakes being part of the process. We're dealing with humans. We're not perfect. Their mistakes are going to happen. Again, if you're able to document, if you're able to make things better over time, allow for time, allow for internal meetings and all of those types of things where you can talk about things. If things are not perfect from the start, you can talk about making them perfect or close to perfect, let's say, and making them better. Not only the deliverable, but the part of the process that maybe broke down. Maybe there was something that could be done better next time. Clearly identify not only objectives, not only end goals, whether those are marketing goals or even project goals, but make sure that there are clear responsibilities. Make sure everybody knows what they're doing. Part of process is that there is a unique and complementary role for everybody on the team. Don't walk away from a meeting saying a lot of great things, but nobody really knows who was going to do what was talked about in that meeting. I mean, that's happened to me countless times in my career. Is again, you have a great session and everybody just kind of walks away, and then 2 minutes later you're like, wow, that was great, but am I supposed to do that? When am I supposed to do that? Or are they doing it? So just be very clear. Don't ever end a meeting without everybody knowing who's going to do what and by when. Don't even start a meeting without understanding whose role is what within that meeting. And definitely within a phase of a project or a project, make sure that you clearly identify whose role is what. Make decisions out loud. So this kind of goes back to that lone wolf comment as well, is when you do things and you do it unilaterally, it doesn't give the rest of your team the benefit to be able to learn from you. So if you're a mentor or a leader in an organization, doesn't give people the benefit of learning, oh, okay, well, that's the thought process that went into that decision. That helps them in their process, whether it's creative process or project management process, whatever that is. Likewise, if you're not an executive at a company, but you're on a project and a key member and playing a key role in it, it helps your boss, your manager, your teammates be able to understand where you're coming from. Maybe you heard something completely different from the clients or from the stakeholders than they did. Sometimes you may have heard something and it's exactly what they intended. Sometimes it's a little bit off, but it gives everybody the opportunity to be able to hear what's going on, and therefore you don't go in a corner, knock out your deliverable, and then it comes back and it's off. Everybody kind of gets to understand the thought process and, again, why things are being done. People want ownership, whether they are the owner of the project or the company or whatever. They want some kind of empowerment and ownership of at least their place in the project. When things are done completely outside of them really understanding, it's a bit of a demoralizer, and it takes away some of their their buy-in to the end result of the project. Make sure, just like roles and responsibilities, make sure that you agree on what done is. And I think it sounds very simple on the surface, but it can get very, very complicated depending on what you're talking about. And so, when is something done? Is it done when the client approves? Is it done when we're out of budget? Is it done when it meets the objective? So, or is it's any number of other things. So, when you're working with a team, make sure that they understand when do they stop working on it, or do they stop working on it? Do they continue to iterate and optimize? And then, once you're able to do that, it allows you to be able to focus on the results of, okay, well, if done means X, then let me get to X. And instead of, again, going on a million different tangents, or sometimes having great ideas, but they're not perfectly aligned with that definition of what done means. So getting started, we'll talk a few things here. So compare notes from the beginning of a project, product, initiative, even creating processes. So again, this goes back to kind of thinking out loud, and just make sure that you're everybody's kind of on they don't necessarily have to agree, but everyone has to be on the same page about what's going to get done, and how it's going to get done. Think about your last project, or the current one that you're on, and maybe the project that that you just completed, or maybe you're about to start one. What are the things that are similar, and what are the things that are different? Could you replicate some of the things that you did on something you just finished, and try to do those processes? Some organizations are different than others. When I ran my marketing agency, we were very process oriented. And so we had a document for everything, naming conventions, all of these kinds of things. I've worked with plenty of agencies and others where that is not the case. There isn't a lot of documentation. It's a bit more ad hoc. If you have to start, whether it's from scratch or kind of start from let's say an early starting point, start from something that worked, or at least that everybody's familiar with, and then you can have kind of a common frame of reference and a common vocabulary. And again, even if the last project wasn't wildly successful, at least you can say, okay, we did this, this, and this. We used these documents as an agency. Like, we showed the client this document. They had a million questions that didn't make sense to them. Let's figure out how to make that document make sense. And at least you're starting from something where everybody was kind of part of that last initiative, instead of recreating something completely different, which may not necessarily even be better than the new one, because it's really just starting from scratch, and it may have its own challenges. Think about morale. I mean, I've worked with a lot of organizations on employee experience and employee engagement, and it's expensive to have unengaged employees, and it's expensive to have turnover at an agency. The cost of replacing great team members, the cost of replacing great clients as well is huge. But think about your internal team and what can make their lives easier. Process is here to help them. It's not here to be cumbersome or to be dogmatic or things like that. It's here to help and actually enable better creativity. And ultimately, think about your clients. At the end of the day, you need clients that buy more and refer others to your organization. Whether that's whether you're an agency that needs marketing clients, or if you're in-house and you need customers, those customers feel some of the pains that your internal processes create, whether it's outright or whether it's intuitive. If there are gaps, if there are miscommunications, your customers are going to feel that somehow, whether it's outright or they're going to feel it somehow. So, definitely some things to keep in mind. So, I hope this is helpful. I spend a great deal of time thinking about this. I work with agencies to help them improve their processes, and and stuff. So, I'd love to hear, any questions or ideas or reactions that you have to this. Just really quickly before I do that, because I know we have some time here for questions. I would like to give a couple plugs here. So my podcast, as Carrie mentioned, it's called the Agile World. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Google, pretty much any major podcast outlet. And as mentioned, I have a number of books available for sale as well. And so I'd love you to check it out, and can certainly share more. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Let's open the floor for questions. Feel free to just pop in and ask your question right away. While folks are thinking,
silence was deafening, right?
Go ahead, Grant.
I said, and the silence was deafening.
If I covered everything, then we're good.
On the making decisions out loud, are you speaking across the company? Or are you speaking about being in meetings? Can you further define that a bit?
Yeah, I think great question, and I think it's both, really. It's I think to the meeting example, I think when a bunch of people are sitting there, and some people, some of this comes down to there's introverts and extroverts, and some people are more outspoken than others. But as an introvert, I've often found in retrospect that I didn't benefit when I kept my thoughts and well, thoughts, not necessarily feelings, but thoughts to myself. So it does help. Again, if you're a leader, it helps people that report to you and people that are part of the organization kind of learn your thought process and learn from you. And if you're another part of the team, it's an opportunity for someone to hear what the rest of the team is hearing and either emphasize that or course correct it. But I think, same thing in the course of a project. I think everybody, so many decisions and, so many people that are at, let's say, companies where there's less functional teams, a lot of decisions kind of get made in a vacuum and they're just kind of handed down. And I don't think that helps morale. I don't think that helps anybody learn. And I don't think that helps the next go round. If you're the next project, nobody really gets to learn from that. It's like you're having to think through everything, from scratch again.
I'll hop in with the question. So I know a lot of what you talked about refers to the people on the team who are in those leadership roles, but what if you were the person on the team who's trying to manage up or pitch an idea? How do you use some of this stuff to facilitate your agility in the workplace?
Yeah, I think this comes down to sharing your thought process and sharing what you're hearing. Again, this can be a learning experience, and good leaders, they listen to their team, whether they're the intern or or their second in command. And so if you're a junior member of the team, let's just say, it helps for you to share. Again, either you misheard something and it's going to come out later in the you're going to give a deliverable and it's going to be way off. And so it would be better to be course corrected at the very beginning of the process, or you're going to have an amazing insight and everybody's going to be able to benefit from that as they kind of split and go their own ways. Like, I don't see it as there's no way to lose. And, if you're in an organization that doesn't value that, then I do think it's time to consider where you work. And, not everybody has the luxury of changing jobs on a dime, but it is something that great organizations value, those ideas. They don't always follow the ideas because not every idea, can be implemented, but great organizations take the time and effort to at least listen. And when they make sense, they implement those. And at the very least, listening helps those junior members of the team just kind of practice that. That's a muscle that needs exercising, is like kind of speaking up and overcoming that. Again, extroverts are a little different than introverts. Like, some people are a little more willing to speak up than others, but everybody needs practice articulating ideas. And so, that needs to be embraced by leaders.
I almost feel like that's a whole other session is learning how to like jump up and speak up and not be afraid to ask the question or say you don't understand. Sometimes the most valuable answer is, I don't know.
Yeah. Or this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make you not intelligent. It's simply, sometimes the documentation is terrible or the explanation was not clear. And that's a learning experience for the people that explained or wrote or whatever it is. And so, again, as long as you're in an environment where change is accepted, and I think that's where we are at as a society, is organizations need to be more open to change and adaptive anyway. And the ones that are and embrace those things are the ones that are going to survive and not only survive, but thrive.
Any other questions for Greg?
Absolutely. Like the Simon Sinek quote.
Well, we had a few
It's not a
comments in the
long
chat
video
from.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not a long video to watch either, and it's really good. Sorry.
That's great.
No. We've got a few comments in the chat just thanking you for the program, Greg, and how valuable it's been to people. Make sure you do listen to the podcast, everybody, if you haven't so far. I announced 3 winners in the chat, and I'm going to do one last winner out loud, and that last prize goes to Roger Bridges. So if you just want to shoot me over your email, Roger, and I will get you on the list for a book. Remember, if you want to get more involved with AAF or need any information, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions. Greg, do you have any thoughts to wrap up?
No, just really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody today. And my social was on the slides and stuff like that, but I'm very active on LinkedIn. Please connect with me. Would love to talk more. Would love your ideas, and if there's anything else I can do to help, always happy to connect with great people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everybody, for taking an hour out this afternoon and joining us. We do not have a program scheduled for June. We're going to take a break in June as we start to figure out moving back to more of an in-person or hybrid format. Like I said, to start this program, if you have some ideas on how to do that, if you know a place that would be great to host or facilitate such a meeting, or if you know a speaker that would just be awesome, or if you have a topic you want to learn more about, this is definitely the time to speak up. Like Greg said, you don't get to share your voice if you don't speak up. So take that little chunk of initiative and let me know if you have something you want to share. And we hope to see everybody again in about a month. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you. Great to meet everybody. Thanks.